Hello, people. This is Richard Sennett's The Fall of Public Man, Public Roles, and it specifically has to do with clothing. Clothing in the 1700s or the 18th century, and this interesting reflection between the theater and real life, in speech and in dress in the 18th century. So I'm just going to get to it. Sennett says this. He says, one way in which 18th century urban society, and this should be in like Paris and London and that kind of stuff, made social encounters meaningful was through codes of belief that worked in both the theater and everyday life. I mean, so the theater kind of had reached a sort of peak, and there was this reflection that occurred between the drama and the theater, and particularly in dress. You can kind of come at clothing as if it were a kind of costuming for a particular theatrical performance. I mean, I think Irving Goffman's really brilliant at sort of what looking at the performative way we live our everyday lives, and costuming is a big part of that. Clothing is a big part of that. And in the 18th century, it was, on some levels, it was just a fantastically huge part of how people live their everyday lives and the kind of clothes they wore. And then Sennett says the structural bridge between belief in the theater and on the street was founded by two principles, one concerning the body, the other the voice. And I'm going to focus here mostly on the body. Uh, Sennett continues. He says, the body was treated as mannequin. Speech was treated as a sign rather than symbol. So that's the second one, the stuff about. But this idea of the body being treated as a mannequin is really fascinating, because what is a mannequin? It's just kind of there to be seen. A mannequin doesn't really participate in like its own experience. It's just there as an object. So the objectification of the body through a kind of odd costuming was a significant part of urban life in the 18th century. And Richard Sennett continues. He says, by the first principle, body as mannequin, people visualize clothes as matters of contrivance, decoration, and convention, with the body serving as mannequin rather than as an expressive living creature. And it's so like stuff like, you know, comfort in almost like an organicism would have been totally lost. And what he's going to say later, right, and is that, I mean, stuff like putting pineapples and ships in ladies' hair, and the kind of really baroque and extravagant dresses, and the super thick makeup for both men and women created this ambiance of a sort of theatrical performance, right? People would be walking down the Champs-Élysées, right? It's the main street in Paris, and more to be seen, right? You could think of now like the sort of the catwalk, is that what it's called? I don't know. Like when there's a big premiere of a movie or something, and the movie stars walk down and they get their pictures taken. I mean, what if real life were sort of like that in some way? And all right, so the second part, I'm gonna read it, and I don't think it's something you have to know, but it's interesting. He says, by the second, they heard speech which signified in and of itself, rather than by reference to outside situations or to the person of the speaker. By both principles, they were able to detach behavior with others from personal attributes of physical or social condition, and so had taken the second step in creating a geography of out in public. Right, so I'll just move on. Sennett says, a modern city dweller suddenly transported back to Paris or London in the 1750s would find crowds whose appearance was at once simpler and more puzzling than the crowds of our time. A man in the street now can distinguish the poor from the middle class by sight, and with a little less precision, the rich from the middle class. And then he says, appearances on the streets of London and Paris 2 centuries ago were manipulated so as to be more precise indicators of social standing. Servants were easily distinguishable from laborers. The kind of labor performed could be read from the peculiar clothes adopted by each trade, as could the status of a laborer in his craft by glancing at certain ribbons and buttons he wore. In the middle ranks of society, barristers, accountants, and merchants each wore distinctive decorations, wigs, or ribbons. The upper ranks of society appeared on the street in costumes which not merely set them apart from the lower order, but dominated the street. And so this idea of marking class by sign, that's what he's getting at here. That clothing didn't just communicate, some preference. It marked one's social status in society. And I mean, it was done so by law. So, I mean, you'd have to, you could think of, I don't know, like a wedding ring or something like that, that says something, and it would have been mandated. And so even to the extent of one's trade, um, all right, Senate continues, and what he says here is he's describing the kind of absurd lengths that people would go to be noticed, this sort of body as mannequins. So he says the costumes of the elite and of the wealthier bourgeoisie would puzzle a modern eye. There are patches of red pigment smeared on nose or forehead or around the chin. Wigs were enormous and elaborate. So were the headdresses of women, containing in addition highly detailed model ships woven into the hair, or baskets of fruit, or even men and women were painted either apoplexy red or dull white. Masks would be worn, but only for the fun of frequently taking them off. The body seemed to have become an amusing toy to play with. And so here, this is the sort of the paradigm of the body as mannequin. It's a sort of toy or an object that you could mess around with, and you could almost think of like a child getting into her mother's makeup kit or something like that. I mean, imagine like a wig with a basket of fruit sewn into it, or like the little model ship that he's talking about in a woman's hair, right? And as I said before, both men and women wore uh, wore makeup and wigs and masks. Sennett continues, he says, during his first moments on the street, the modern interloper, or the explorer, I guess, would be tempted to conclude that there was no problem of order in this society, everybody being so clearly labeled. And if this modern observer had some historical knowledge, he would give a simple explanation for this order. People were just observing the law, for there existed on the statute books in both France and England sumptuary laws, and like sumptuary laws are like money laws that govern who can spend what on what items. So, for there existed on the statute books in both France and England sumptuary laws which assigned to each station in the social hierarchy a set of appropriate clothes and forbade people of any one station from wearing clothes of people in another rank. And so there, your sort of caste or your status, your level in the hierarchy would be signaled, be a direct sign, like based on the clothing you were wearing, and it was outlawed for you to be wearing another class's clothing.